Okay, so welcome back to this next video in which we are discussing pain and analgesic drugs. Okay, so in the previous video what we looked at is the synapses between the primary nociceptive neurons and these spinothalamic projection neurons. What we now want to see is where these spinothalamic projection neurons are going to send their axons. Okay, right. So we're going to now look at the spinothalamic tract, which is this tract from the spine to the thalamus. Okay, so the first thing I want to talk about is a very basic concept, and that's the concept that the sensory information coming from the left side of the body goes to the right side of the brain, okay, and the sensory information from the right side of the body goes to the left side of the brain. Okay, so to put this in diagrammatic form, all of the sensory information coming from this right side of the body is going to go up to the left side of the brain and be processed up by the left side of the brain. Okay, and all of the sensory information coming from the left side of the body is going to go and be processed by the right side of the brain. Okay, so that goes for not just the sensory information concerning pain, but also all sorts of innocuous sensations as well, so normal touch, normal thermoreception, things like that. Okay, so at the moment what's happened is nociceptors have come in to the spinal cord. They've sent their central processes into the spinal cord, and they've then synapsed on spinothalamic projection neurons that are on the same side of the body as the side where the original nociceptor, which is the end of the primary nociceptive neuron, actually was. Okay, so now what needs to happen is these spinothalamic projection neurons, their axons need to cross to the other side of the central nervous system, basically. It needs to cross to the contralateral side of the central nervous system, so that's a fancy word that's very important here. Contra means opposite, okay, so the opposite side of the spinal cord. Okay, so basically what is going to happen is these spinothalamic projection neurons are going to have their axons like so, and their axons are going to now cross from the dorsal horn here, and we've always been imagining that the dorsal horn was the right dorsal horn here. They're now going to cross from the right dorsal horn to the left anterolateral white matter column here, okay? And then spinothalamic projection neurons in the left dorsal horn here are going to send their axons across the spinal cord into the contralateral, in this case the right anterolateral white matter column, and then it's going to ascend up on the contralateral side and then go to the contralateral side of the brain once it finally gets into the brain. Okay, right. So what's going to happen then is the axon is going to ascend in the contralateral, anterolateral white matter column all the way up to the thalamus. Okay, so let me now show you a bit of neuroanatomy then. Okay, so the first picture I'm going to draw is a picture that I think everyone should be comfortable with, which is just where we're looking at the brain from the left-hand side. Okay, so I'm going to draw this picture in here. I'll squeeze it in here. Okay, so here is the left cerebral hemisphere, here. Okay, here is the left temporal lobe, like so. Okay, and then peeking out from underneath, what you'll then have is the brainstem structures, or at least the left-hand side of the brainstem structures, like so, which will then become the spinal cord, like so. And then also, sitting behind the brainstem here, you'll have the cerebellum. So let me label up the different portions here. So in green, this is the left cerebral hemisphere, or the left cerebrum, okay? And that's the main portion of the brain that everyone will recognise, okay? Then sitting underneath the left cerebrum, what we have is the smaller brain, the cerebellum, okay, which literally does mean smaller brain, little brain. Okay, and of course we are seeing the left side of the cerebellum. So this is the left side of the cerebellum here. Okay, then what we're also seeing is the brainstem structures, which are effectively the continuation of the spinal cord once it has passed through the hole at the base of the skull, known as the foramen magnum, which I'm just about to mark on here. So the spinal cord passes through this large hole at the base of the skull called the foramen magnum, and then becomes the brainstem on top of that. Okay, so let me highlight up these different brainstem regions. So the first portion of the brainstem, right after the spinal cord, is called the medulla. So here in orange, this is the medulla. Okay, and then above the medulla, you then have the pons sitting on top of that. And then there are more brainstem structures. The problem is that we can't see them in this picture because they're buried underneath the cerebral hemispheres. So to see further brainstem structures, we'll have to remove the cerebral hemispheres. Okay, so going back to the spinothalamic tract, which is this tract of axons moving from the spinothalamic projection neurons up to the thalamus, it will be moving up the spinal cord, and then it stays roughly in the same position as it goes through the brainstem structures. So as it goes through the medulla, the pons, and then it will go through the midbrain, and then to the thalamus, which is sitting on top. So what I'm now going to do is take away the cerebral hemispheres. I'm also going to do away with the cerebellum. I don't want to have to continue drawing that. Okay, and we're just now going to show the continuation of the brainstem upwards, and then what's on top of the brainstem, which is the thalamus. Okay, or the thalami rather. Okay, so I might turn over for this next picture. So, doing this picture again then, here we have the medulla, like so, which is the continuation of the spinal cord below, and I didn't actually label the spinal cord on the previous picture, but I'll do that now. So this is the spinal cord here, okay, which I'll colour in a specific colour. So here in blue, this is the spinal cord. Then above the spinal cord, once again, we have the medulla, which I'll just colour in green here. Then above the medulla, we'll have the pons, like so, which I'll colour in orange, and I'm sorry I've completely abandoned the colour code from the previous picture, but never mind. And then now we can see the next portion of the brainstem, which is above the pons, and this is the last portion of the brainstem, and this is what's known as the midbrain. Okay, so sitting on top of the pons, this is the midbrain, and these three structures together, the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain, collectively they are then known as the brainstem. Okay, right, so we'll colour in the midbrain now in red. Okay, now, the thalami, both of them, are sitting on top of the midbrain. So all of these structures that we've seen so far, the spinal cord, the medulla, the pons, and the midbrain, you only have one of those. Okay, they're symmetrical on both sides, they're sitting perfectly in the midline, but you only have one of them. Okay, so you have one brainstem. But now, when we go up to the thalami, you have two of them, and they're perched on either side of the midbrain. So you have a left thalamus perched on top of the left side of the midbrain, and a right thalamus perched on top of the right side of the midbrain. Now, of course, we are looking from one side. We're looking from the left-hand side, so we're only going to be able to see one of the thalami. So we're only going to be able to see the left thalamus here. Okay, so in yellow here, perched on top of the midbrain, that is the left thalamus. So this here, this is the thalamus, specifically the left thalamus that we're seeing. And then on top of the right half of the midbrain, you'll then have the right thalamus. Okay, right. And the thalami are both sort of egg-shaped structures that are perched on top of the midbrain. Okay, right, so what effectively is going to happen is the two spinothalamic tracts are going to come all the way up the brainstem structures, up the medulla, up the pons, up the midbrain, and then into the thalamus. Okay, and they'll go into their respective thalami. So the left spinothalamic tract, okay, which is the one on the left-hand side in the left anterolateral column, although it has come from nociceptors which were on the right side of the body, that will go up and go into the left thalamus here, and then the thalamus will send the information to the left side of the brain, whilst the right spinothalamic tract, which will be in the right anterolateral column, will go up the right side of the brainstem and then into the right thalamus. Okay, right. So we will now have a look at this for the left spinothalamic tract, which remember is the one in the left anterolateral column. So that's the one we'd be able to see from this sort of picture here. So I might even mark it on in purple. It will be ascending like so, up these structures, and it's going to go into the thalamus. Okay, and you have the same thing on the other side, the right-hand side. Okay, going into the right thalamus though in that case. Okay, so what we now want to see is which specific thalamic nuclei do these axons from these spinothalamic projection neurons actually go into? Well, it's the ventroposterolateral and the ventroposteromedial nucleus. But what does that actually mean? Well, let's draw a picture. Okay, so now let's look at the thalamus from above rather than from the side. Okay, I'm going to draw you the left thalamus. The right thalamus will be the mirror image of this. So here it is, this egg-shaped structure like so, which will be sitting on top of the left-hand side of the midbrain. Okay, and then splitting the thalamus up rather conveniently for neuroanatomists, okay, is what's known as the the medullary lamina, okay. So this is the medullary lamina. I think it can sometimes be called the internal medullary lamina. Okay, so this is the medullary lamina, okay, of the thalamus. Now, as I say, if you were to draw the right thalamus, the medullary lamina will be completely symmetric to this. Okay, and I might just do that. Fortunately, I've written the caption where I would like to draw the right thalamus. So I'm just going to have to shift the right thalamus by a bit. Okay, but in reality, it should be sitting obviously parallel alongside the left thalamus. Okay, so the right thalamus would look like so, with the medullary lamina curved round to this way, like so. Okay, right, so that's the thalamus split up by the medullary lamina. We want to see this ventroposterolateral nucleus. Okay, so this is sitting at this sort of position within the thalamus here. Okay, so this is the ventroposterolateral thalamic nucleus, the VPL nucleus, which stands for ventroposterolateral nucleus. Now we also want to see the ventroposteromedial nucleus, and that one's more difficult to see. Okay, in order to see the ventroposteromedial nucleus, what we need to do is take a which section is it? A coronal section of the thalamus. So basically we need to cut down like so through the thalami, like that. So imagine putting one end of your carving knife there, one end of your carving knife there, cutting down, and we need to look at a cross section. Okay, so let me now draw that picture out for you. Okay, what you'll see is something like this. You'll have the medullary lamina splitting the thalamus up like so. So that penetrates all the way down. So I'll colour this in fact. Here's the medullary lamina now, coloured in orange. And here it is, we've chopped right the way through it, and it splits the thalamus right down. Okay? And then basically what you find is that the ventroposterolateral thalamic nucleus is bigger than you would think just from looking at this picture, because it actually, although it has this wedge that it doesn't comprise, it actually comprises all of this space underneath, so it just doesn't include that little wedge there. Okay? And then inside here, right in the middle, this is where the ventroposteromedial thalamic nucleus is. So really I had absolutely no chance of being able to show it on this picture. Okay, not only is it right at the bottom, but it's also not actually even visible from the outside. Okay, so this is the ventroposteromedial thalamic nucleus, or for short just the VPM nucleus. Okay, right, and it is to these two thalamic nuclei, the ventroposterolateral thalamic nucleus, which I will colour in vivid purple here, like so. So this is the ventroposterolateral nucleus, or the VPL nucleus. And this other one here, which I won't colour in orange, I'll colour in turquoise, the ventroposteromedial nucleus, it's to these two nuclei of the thalami which the two spinothalamic tracts are coming to. Okay, so we've drawn this all for the left thalamus, so the left spinothalamic tract is going to be coming up to these left ventroposterolateral thalamic nuclei and the left ventroposteromedial nucleus. Okay, right. So what will happen then is up will come the axon from the spinothalamic projection neurons, and it will go to either the ventroposterolateral nucleus or the ventroposteromedial nucleus. I've drawn it going to the ventroposterolateral nucleus there. Okay, and then it will synapse on a tertiary neuron. Okay, the third neuron in this great cascade. Okay, so here, this is the tertiary neuron. And then what will happen is this tertiary neuron is now going to carry the signal to other portions of the brain, basically. So the thalamus is just a relay station, okay? I'm going to stress this point. Remember, when we had that junction between the primary afferents, okay, the primary nociceptive afferents, and the secondary spinothalamic projection neurons, that was a convergent synapse. That was where loads of different primary nociceptive afferents were all going to synapse on the same secondary spinothalamic projection neuron, and that gave rise to the phenomenon of referred pain. Okay, that's not going to happen here. Okay, this really is just a relay station where one secondary spinothalamic projection neuron comes in, synapses onto its own little tertiary neuron, which is then going to carry the signal up to areas of the brain. So where now is this signal going to go to? Which portions of the brain am I actually talking about here? Well, one of the principal portions of the brain where, of course, everything is going to go is the primary somatosensory cortex. Let me show you where that is. So let's go back to our picture where we are looking at the brain from the left-hand side. Okay, and I'm just going to show the cerebral hemisphere this time, not the brainstem and the cerebellum. Okay, so here we are is the left cerebral hemisphere viewed from the left-hand side. Okay, now one of the landmark features that you learn about in neuroanatomy is a very large sulcus down the middle here. Okay, and this sulcus is known as the central sulcus. Okay, and it's usually findable. Okay, so if you had a real brain to poke, you would usually be able to find the central sulcus. Now, why is it useful? Well, it's useful for distinguishing portions of cerebral cortex. Okay, now, the portion of cerebral cortex located just behind the central sulcus that I have now coloured in red, this portion of cerebral cortex is known as the primary somatosensory cortex, or sometimes just the primary sensory cortex. Okay, and people often denote the primary somatosensory cortex as S1. So S for sensory, and then because it's the primary sensory cortex, S1. Okay, so that's the primary somatosensory cortex. Now all sorts of sensory information comes to this portion of cortex. Okay, so all of your touch sensation comes here, all of your thermal sensation comes here, everything comes here basically. Not just your pain sensation, but of course your pain sensation does come here. So these tertiary neurons are going to be sending the signal now to neurons in the primary somatosensory cortex. Now it's important to know that there is what is known as a sensory homunculus. Okay, so this primary somatosensory cortex is ordered, and let me just concentrate on spelling homunculus. Okay, so the primary somatosensory cortex is ordered. Certain portions of this cortex serve certain portions of the body, and remember, we are looking here at the left primary somatosensory cortex, which will be processing sensory information from the right side of the body. So this will have right side body information coming to it. And basically, the sensory homunculus works like this. The portions right at the top here, these will be processing information coming from the feet and lower portions of the body. Okay, and then as you go gradually down, okay, what you'll be moving on to is you'll be moving up the body basically. So you'll go up to the, let's say, knees, up to the thighs, up to the trunk, up to the arms, up to the neck, and then gradually up into the face basically. Okay, so there is this order basically to where portions of sensory information from certain portions of the body is processed, and that's what is meant by the sensory homunculus basically. Okay, right, so basically these tertiary neurons will be projecting to neurons in the primary somatosensory cortex on the basis of where has this information actually come from. If it's come from right down near the feet, then the tertiary neurons will be going up to this top portion of the primary somatosensory cortex, whereas if it's come from up near the face, then the tertiary neurons will be going more down here to this lower portion of primary somatosensory cortex. Okay, so that's one of the key places where the information now goes. Two more places, and I should probably say what the function of this is. This handles the conscious awareness, the conscious sensory experience. Okay, now the two other places where this information is going to go to handle the emotional part of pain, so the emotional response, the sadness that I wish I hadn't done that kind of feelings, okay, beyond just the conscious awareness of this horrible sensory stimulus. Okay, right, so the two other portions of cortex where this sensory information is going to go to are the insular cortex and the cingulate cortex, which are both involved in the emotional aspects. So the insular cortex and also the cingulate cortex. Okay, so let me now show you where these portions of cortex are. So we'll firstly start with the insular cortex. So these are difficult portions of cortex to find, basically, because they're not visible on the external surface of the brain like so. To find the insular cortex, what you basically have to do is stick your hands into this fissure here, okay? This fissure that separates the temporal lobe off from the portions up here, okay? And this fissure is known as the lateral fissure. So what I'm now going to do is draw the lateral fissure viewed from a different aspect, okay? We're going to take a coronal section through the brain and draw the lateral fissure in coronal section, okay? So it will now look like so. So here is the cortex from this portion up here, okay? So from either the parietal lobe behind the central sulcus or the frontal lobe before the central sulcus, depending on where we've made the cut. And then it will be invaginating inwards in this lateral fissure, like so. So here is this lateral fissure, and then here is the temporal lobe cortex. Okay, and basically the lateral fissure actually ends up opening out, like so, and there is a massive portion of cerebral cortex buried deep inside here that's not visible. Okay, and this then is the insular cortex. Okay, so that's how you find the insular cortex, by digging your hands into the lateral fissure, okay, and then when it opens up, you can find this new portion of cortex here in blue, and this is the insular cortex, and it's involved in emotions, okay, and generally quite bad emotions, not good emotions, okay, emotions relating to painful situations and damage to the body. Okay, right. Similarly, another portion of cortex that's generally involved in not particularly nice emotions is the cingulate cortex. Okay, so let me now show you where the cingulate cortex is, and again, it's one that you're not going to be able to find easily. You have to dig around to find it. Okay, so this time we have to dig our hands into the fissure that separates the two cerebral hemispheres, known as the longitudinal fissure. Okay, so there is a large fissure separating the two hemispheres, known as the longitudinal fissure, okay, which is longitudinally, and we now need to dig our hands down there. So what I'm now going to do is basically take a sagittal section of the brain where we've cut down the longitudinal fissure, and we'll look at the right cerebral hemisphere from that new aspect, basically, from that sagittal section. Okay, so if I draw this like so, here is the right cerebral hemisphere, okay, here is the temporal lobe portion here, and then basically you'll have the right half of the brainstem. In fact, I have messed this up, let me try this again. Okay, so do this here, here is this portion, here's that portion, and that bit's the wrong bit there, and this shouldn't have been as big. Okay, then we've got the right half of the brainstem here. Okay, so here's the right portion of the pons, here's the right portion of the midbrain, here's the right thalamus here. Okay, the rest of this will come back like so, and then you'll have the cerebellum behind like so. Then you'll have the medulla here, and the spinal cord here. Okay, right. Then, this is it viewed from this medial aspect, and now one of the structures that we will cut through when we did this is the corpus callosum here. Okay, and then the portion of cortex above the corpus callosum, this portion of cortex here, outside of the corpus callosum here, this is the cingulate cortex. Okay, so the corpus callosum is all of these fibers moving between the two cerebral hemispheres. Okay, so it's a great white matter bundle, basically. Okay, but above that and around that, you have a piece of cortex that's facing into the longitudinal fissure. And the right cerebral hemisphere shown here will have one of these, and so will the left cerebral hemisphere. Okay, and this cortex is known as the cingulate cortex. And again, it's very involved in emotions, generally not nice emotions either. Okay, and again, these tertiary neurons, some of them will go to the cingulate cortex to deliver this information to there in order to mount the emotional response to pain. Okay, right. So, to summarize then, what happens then when you experience a stimulus which has the potential to cause tissue damage, such as a hammer banging on your thumb? Okay, what that is going to do is it's going to activate nociceptors, okay, via the receptors that the nociceptors have in their free nerve endings. The nociceptors are then going to generate action potentials which will fire up the primary nociceptive afferents, okay, which will then release glutamate and substance P onto these secondary spinothalamic projection neurons, which will then cross to the contralateral side of the spinal cord and ascend in the contralateral anterolateral white matter column up to the contralateral thalamus, okay, where these secondary spinothalamic projection neurons will synapse onto the tertiary neuron, okay, and the tertiary neuron will then carry this information either to the primary somatosensory cortex or the insular cortex or the cingulate cortex, and this will mount the sensory feeling of pain in the case of the primary somatosensory cortex, and the emotional part of pain in the case of the insular cortex and the cingulate cortex. Okay, so that is what happens in the case of a stimulus which has the potential to cause tissue damage. And remember, because of the different speed of the initial primary nociceptive afferents, i.e. the A delta fiber primary sensory afferents and the C fiber primary nociceptive afferents, you get the first pain and then the second pain in that situation. Okay. What we will move on to in the next video is discussing inflammatory pain. So when tissue has actually been damaged because of an injury or because of infection, what actually causes that prolonged pain, that continuous pain associated with damaged tissue? Okay, because that's different to the pain that we've been looking at before. Before we've been doing the simple pain, which is the pain caused by stimuli that could potentially cause tissue damage. Now what we're going to do is look at how, when tissue is damaged, why that leads to this continuous prolonged pain.